Table of contents. Normandy.
Normandy.
Normandy is spelled in French as Normandy.
Normandy is an historic and cultural region in northern France.
Normandy is directly across from England, bordering the English Channel, or as the French call it, La Manche, or the Sleeve.
Here is Normandy and the English Channel, or La Manche.
The Channel Islands are British, but are also culturally and historically part of the Duchy of Normandy.
Le Havre is the second largest city in Normandy, and is almost directly south of Southampton, England.
It is 120 miles, or 193 kilometers, across the English Channel from Southampton in England to Le Havre in Normandy.
It is then 110 miles, or 177 kilometers, from Le Havre to Paris.
The principal river through Normandy is the Seine. The Seine flows through Paris, and then meanders into Normandy. The two largest cities in Normandy are on the Seine, Rouen and Le Havre. More exactly, Le Havre is on the Seine estuary, or Baie de la Seine.
Normandy was formerly a province of France, but in 1791 was divided into the departments shown here of Manche, Calvados, Orne, Eure, and Seine-Maritime.
Normandy is divided by the Seine River into Haute Normandy or Upper Normandy and Basse Normandy or Lower Normandy. Rouen is considered to be the capital or chief city of Normandy, and Caen is considered to be the capital or chief city of Basse Normandy.
The largest cities of Normandy are Le Havre, Rouen, Caen, Cherbourg, and Dieppe.
Here are the area population numbers for the largest cities in Normandy. The total population of Normandy is 3.2 million.
Normandy is a region of flat grasslands and farmlands interrupted by gentle hills, and the hedgerows that commonly serve to demarcate fields.
The hedgerows in Normandy were a major and somewhat unexpected problem following the Allied invasion in June 1944. The hedgerows were used to create small pastures and farm fields, many of them just a few acres in size and land without rocks or trees. These hedgerows were the fences that kept cattle from wandering off, and allowed farmers to clearly identify what land they owned.
The Normandy hedgerows were made up of linear mounds or walls of earth topped by a thick tangle of trees and brush averaging 4 feet, 1.2 meters, high. Most of the hedgerows dated back hundreds of years, some back to the time of William the Conqueror. Centuries of soil
on a flat and otherwise featureless coastal plain. The hedgerows created divided terrain with limited lines of sight and restricted virtually all off-road movement.
The hedgerows severely limited the mobility of Allied infantry and tanks during the fighting in Normandy, and provided defensive cover for the German defenders.
The hedgerow problem for the movement of tanks was only partially solved by the development of Allied tanks fitted with their hedgerow cutting devices, or tusks. The tanks were nicknamed the Rhino, or rhinoceros.
Normandy is relatively flat in the northern coastal regions, and somewhat hilly in the south.
A principal feature of Normandy is the Cotentin Peninsula with the port city of Cherbourg at its northern tip.
It is 72 miles, or 116 kilometers from Le Havre to Cherbourg.
Here is the location of Le Havre and Rouen with respect to other major cities in France.
Here is the location of Le Havre and Rouen with respect to other major cities in northern France.
The principal ports in Normandy are Le Havre, Cherbourg, in Dieppe.
The principal economic activities of Normandy are farming, cattle raising, fishing, and tourism.
Sheep raising is also important,
as is fishing.
The historic capital of Rouen produces textiles, while the ports of Cherbourg and Le Havre are shipbuilding and trading centers supplemented by textile and oil refining industries.
Roman Catholicism is the predominant religion, though there were many converts to Protestantism after 1528. Protestant enclaves remain in Rouen and Caen, and other places. The influence of the Roman Catholic Church remains highly visible in the traditional life of the region.
Normandy is famous for its rich, rolling countryside providing plentiful pasture for dairy cattle and orchards for apples.
Norman butter is highly prized, as is Normandy cream.
Norman cuisine relies heavily on cream, served with eggs, fish, poultry, and vegetables.
If cream is the queen of Norman cooking, then cheese is the king.
World-famous varieties of cheese from Normandy are Camembert, Pont-à-l'Évêque, Livarot, and Neuchâtel.
The Calvados region centered around Caen produces superlative apple cider, which is aged with nuts in small oaken barrels or distilled into the celebrated apple brandy that bears its name.
In French, Le Havre means the harbor or the port. The city of Le Havre is the second largest French port.
Le Havre is in northern France and the English Channel coast in the broad estuary where the Seine River empties into the English Channel.
Le Havre is on the right bank of the very broad Seine River estuary.
Across the Bay of the Seine from Le Havre is the picturesque artist town of Honfleur.
Here is Le Havre at the point where the Seine estuary meets the English Channel, or La Manche.
This is a map of Le Havre.
This is the central area of Le Havre showing the extensive port facilities.
Here is Le Havre. And across the Seine from Le Havre is Honfleur.
Le Havre was only a fishing village until 1517, when King Francis I had a harbor built there named Havre de Grace, Haven of Grace.
Under various French rulers, the harbor continued to expand and adapt to accommodate larger vessels. During World War II, the Belgian government was transferred there for a short time after the fall of Antwerp and Ostend to the Germans.
Le Havre was a major embarkation port for transatlantic steamship lines, especially in the 1920s and 1930s.
Le Havre reached its peak in the 20th century with the very famous transatlantic crossings and prestigious transatlantic liners, which are still remembered today, the SS Normandy, the SS Ile-de-France, and the SS France. The decommissioning of the SS France in 1974 marked the end of the transatlantic crossings.
Cruise ships have replaced the transatlantic crossings, and Le Havre is now a major cruise ship port, especially due to its proximity to Paris.
Almost 3/4 of Le Havre's buildings were destroyed during World War II, but were subsequently rebuilt.
This is a map of the central part of Le Havre, showing some of the principal points of interest.
The Place de l'Hôtel de Ville in the center of Le Havre is one of the most spacious public squares in Europe.
The 16th and 17th century Cathédrale Notre-Dame du Havre is one of the few surviving old buildings. Although damaged during World War II, it was restored in the 1970s.
The Église Saint-Joseph du Havre, or Church of Saint Joseph, is an unusual reinforced concrete edifice.
The Musée Mauro, otherwise called MUMA or Musée d'Art Moderne André Malraux, is a museum in Le Havre. Built in 1961.
The Musée Malraux is named after André Malraux, who was Minister of Culture when the museum was opened in 1961. The museum contains one of the most extensive collections of Impressionist paintings in France.
The new museum houses a collection saved from the old museum, which was destroyed in 1944.
Paintings by the 19th century painter Eugène Boudin and the 20th century artist Raoul Dufy are housed there.
This is a painting, Les Bassins de Deauville, by Eugène Boudin.
The harbor of Le Havre, rebuilt after World War II, was expanded in the early 1970s. Le Havre is the second port of France after Marseille, and acts as a terminal for Paris, for deep draft vessels.
Before World War II, Le Havre was one of the principal centers of passenger traffic with North America. This role has virtually ceased. However, because of air travel,
regular car ferry services run to England and Ireland.
Le Havre's main imports are fuel oil and tropical goods, such as cotton and coffee.
Le Havre's industries now include the manufacture of machinery and automobiles.
This includes the Renault factory in nearby Sandouville, established in 1964.
The Abbey Gravelle, also called Abbey of Saint-Honorine, was founded in the 11th century.
Here is a picturesque old house in Le Havre.
Rouen.
Rouen is the largest city in Normandy after Le Havre, and has a population of 385,000. And a metropolitan area population of 520,000.
Like Paris, about 60 miles further upstream, Rouen is situated on the Seine River, mostly on the right or north bank.
Rouen is the prefecture, or capital of the Seine Maritime Department. It is also the capital of the old Normandy region of France. Rouen was founded by the Romans who called it Rhodomagus.
In the 9th century Rouen was overrun by the Normans.
The Gros Horloge or Great Clock is a 14th century astronomical clock.
The Gros Horloge is a Renaissance arch crossing the Rue du Gros Horloge.
Rouen is known for its Notre Dame Cathedral, with its Tour de Beurre, or Butter Tower.
This is the Notre Dame Cathedral in Rouen.
The Tour de Beurre, Butter Tower, is named for its funding by donations from wealthy citizens in return for the privilege of continuing to eat butter during Lent.
The Notre Dame Cathedral in Rouen was the subject of a series of paintings by Claude Monet.
This is the Abbey Church of Saint Anne in Rouen, dating from the 12th to the 15th century.
This is a map of the central part Rouen showing some of the principal points of interest.
Here is a Rouen street scene.
This is a Rouen flower market
and a flower shop.
Here are macaroons in a patisserie in Rouen.
Mont-Saint-Michel.
Mont-Saint-Michel is one of France's most recognizable landmarks.
Mont-Saint-Michel is in western Normandy on the border with Brittany.
Mont-Saint-Michel is about 250 miles, or 400 kilometers from Le Havre.
Mont-Saint-Michel and its bay are part of the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites, and more than 3 million people visit it each year.
Mont-Saint-Michel has held strategic fortifications since ancient times, and since the 8th century been the seat of a monastery.
Étretat.
Étretat is a tourist and farming town situated about 20 miles, or 32 kilometers northeast of Le Havre.
This shows the location of Étretat in the Pays d'Écosse, which is a chalk plateau similar to the chalk cliffs of Dover in England on the other side of the channel.
Étretat is best known for its cliffs, including 3 natural arches and the Pointed Needle.
These cliffs and the associated resort beach attracted artists including Eugène Boutin, Gustave Courbet and Claude Monet.
These are the chalk cliffs at Étretat.
This is another view of the chalk cliffs at Étretat.
Scenes of Normandy.
This is on Fleur Harbor in the evening.
Horses in the field.
This is the Abbey of Grouchy-les-Vaches, near Le Havre.
The Château de Harcourt is a masterpiece of medieval architecture, and has the oldest arboretum in France.
This is the Veterans Parade in Rouen near the D-Day invasion beaches.
This is Saint Valery in Caen.
This is Catville on the Cherbourg Peninsula.
A typical Normandy scene.
The history of Normandy.
France was inhabited by the Celts from Paleolithic times.
The present-day Celts are now principally in Brittany, Wales, Ireland and Scotland.
The Celtic inhabitants of this region of Gaul were conquered by Julius Caesar in 56 BC. And the region eventually became the Roman province of Gaul.
The inhabitants were Christianized in the 3rd and 4th centuries, and passed under Frankish rule in the late 5th century, becoming part of the Frankish kingdom.
The Vikings.
The Vikings carried out raids all over Europe beginning in the 8th century.
The Viking homelands were the Scandinavian countries of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark.
The coast of France was repeatedly devastated by raids of the Vikings, or Northmen, from the 8th century on, and as its rulers in the region became weaker, the Vikings penetrated farther inland in the course of their depredations.
The Vikings began raiding and plundering the Seine Valley as far as Paris in 820.
The Vikings, or Norsemen, who invaded and then settled in northern France, or the Frankish kingdom, are called the Normans, and the region they settled became known as Normandy.
A Viking named Rollo had previously won a reputation as a great leader of Viking raiders in Scotland and Ireland. He soon emerged as the outstanding personality among the new settlers.
In 885 the Normans laid siege to Paris.
Finally, in 911, the French King Charles III, the Simple, ceded the territory around Rouen and the mouth of the Seine River to Rollo, the chief of the largest band of Vikings. In the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte,
the Normans founded the Duchy of Normandy in northern France. Rollo's Christianized successors to the Dukedom of Normandy acquired neighboring territories in a series of wars, becoming so powerful that the control they exercised over their domains was practically independent of the French crown.
Within a generation, the Vikings, or Normans, as they came to be known, had extended their rule westward, covering an area that became known as Normandy.
From Normandy, the Normans sent out expeditions of conquest and colonization to southern Italy and Sicily, into England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland.
From then on, until the mid-11th century, there were ruthless and forceful Norman rulers calling themselves the Counts, or Dukes, of Normandy. They ruled over the indigenous Frankish population of the region,
Despite their eventual conversion to Christianity, their adoption of the French language, and their abandonment of sea roving for Frankish cavalry warfare in the decades following their settlement in Normandy, the Normans retained many of the traits of their piratical Viking ancestors.
In their expansion into other parts of Europe, the Normans compiled a record of astonishingly daring exploits, in which often a mere handful of men would vanquish an enemy many times as numerous. They had an unequaled capacity for rapid movement across land and sea.
The Norman Conquest.
The Norman Conquest was the military conquest of England by William, Duke of Normandy. It was produced by his decisive victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066.
The Norman Conquest resulted in profound political, administrative, and social changes in the British Isles. It also produced major changes in the English language, particularly in the vocabulary.
At the beginning of 1066, Edward the Confessor ruled England. He was 61 years old, and was dying. King Edward had no children, so succession was difficult. There was no direct heir to the English throne.
Edward the Confessor, last king of the Old English royal line, had almost certainly, in 1051, designated William, Duke of Normandy, as his successor.
On Edward's death on January 5, 1066, Harold, the powerful Earl of Wessex, had himself crowned king. His position, however, was far from secure.
William was eager to claim the crown, and by August 1066 he had assembled a force of about 5,000 knights ready for embarkation from ports from the coast of Normandy.
William then crossed the English Channel with his fleet, landing in Pevensey Bay on September 28. He moved inland a short distance to Hastings, where he defeated the English under Harold.
William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066.
The influence of the Normans on the English language can be illustrated by looking at two words: beef and cow.
Beef, commonly eaten by the aristocracy, derives from the Anglo-Norman, while the Anglo-Saxon commoners, who tended the cattle, retained the Germanic cow.
Many legal terms, such as indict, jury, and verdict, have Anglo-Norman roots because the Normans ran the courts.
This split, where words commonly used by the aristocracy have Romantic roots and words frequently used by the Anglo-Saxon commoners have Germanic roots, can be seen in many instances.
Sometimes French words replaced Old English words. Crime replaced fire and uncle replaced steam.
Other times, French and Old English components combined to form a new word, as the French gentle and the Germanic man formed gentleman.
Other times, two different words with roughly the same meaning survive into modern English. Thus, we have the Germanic doom, and the French judgment, or wish and desire.
Here are some Anglo-Norman and Central, or Parisian, French doublets that have come into English.
According to one study, about 28% of the English vocabulary comes from French, including Anglo-French, in green. Note that such percentages vary greatly depending on what amount of rare and technical words are included in the calculation.
The 100 Years' War.
In 1204, King John of England lost the province of Normandy to the King of France.
The 100 Years' War, lasted a little over 100 years from 1337 until 1453, although fighting was by no means continuous during that time. The basic cause of the conflict was the possession of England of territories in France from the time of the Norman invasion of 1066.
The war started in May 1337 when King Philip VI of France attempted to confiscate the English territories in the Duchy of Aquitaine, located in southwestern France.
Most of the sporadic fighting and battles took place in northern France. From the beginning of the war in 1337, until the Battle of Orleans in 1428, the English won many victories including the decisive battles of Crécy, Poitiers and Agincourt.
The English used a new method of warfare by combining forces of longbow archers with dismounted men-at-arms with much success. Particularly in the Battle of Agincourt in 1415.
Rouen was besieged by Henry V in 1418, and capitulated after 6 months.
In 1429, at the Siege of Orleans, the French finally gained the upper hand when Joan of Arc led a relief force which successfully defeated the English.
In 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen by the English.
For the next 25 years, the French defeated the English at many engagements, and the English retreated from France except for Calais.
The 100 Years' War was a series of raids, sieges and naval battles interspersed with truces and uneasy peace. The Long War ended in July 1453 when the French finally expelled the English from the continent, except for Calais, by force.
Normandy D-Day invasion. June 6, 1944.
The Allied invasion of Normandy took place on June 6, 1944. It was the first step in the liberation of France, and the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany.
The Allied forces embarked from a number of ports along the south coast of England.
The landings took place on several beaches between Caen and the Cotentin Peninsula.
The code names for the beaches were Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. U.S., British, and Canadian forces joined together in the invasion.
It was on the beach of Rouen that, during the invasion of Normandy immediately after D-Day, the Allies established an artificial temporary harbor to allow the unloading of heavy equipment without waiting for the conquest of deep-water ports such as Le Havre or Cherbourg.
Although at the center of the Gold Beach landing zone, Arromanches was spared the brunt of the fighting on D-Day so the installation and operation of the port could proceed as quickly as possible without damaging the beach and destroying surrounding lines of communication.
The temporary harbor at Arromanches was completed on June 14, 1944. This artificial port allowed the disembarkation of 9,000 tons of material per day.
A museum was established at Arromanches called Musée du Débarquement, or Museum of the Landings. Its purpose is to commemorate the D-Day invasion of Normandy and the very important role of the artificial harbors at Arromanches and elsewhere.
The Musée du Débarquement is built on the site of the artificial harbor whose vestiges can still be seen a few hundred yards away.
The climate of Normandy.
Will it be hot? Or will it be cold in Normandy?
Here are the average high and low temperatures in degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year in Le Havre. We see midday highs in the summer months of only in the mid-60s. and nighttime lows down in the mid to high 50s. So it could be a little bit chilly.
Here are the average high and low temperatures in degrees Celsius throughout the year in Le Havre.
Here is the average number of days with precipitation throughout the year in Le Havre.
So, our prediction is that it might rain when we get to Le Havre, or it might not. Table of contents.